everybody, and welcome to UnAnchored Boston Sports. My name is Bob Lobel. That's not Mike Lynch sitting next to me. It's Richard Johnson, the curator of the New England Sports Museum. But hang on, Richard. I just need to explain why Lynchy isn't here.
Yeah.
He's in Mass General, and he's doing
Oh,
really well, and he's
good.
going through some tough stuff. But we all go through tough stuff from time to time, and he's going to be just fine. He's just not
Yeah.
here, so he's in Mass General, and hopefully he'll be back as soon as he possibly can.
Bob, here's for Mike.
Yeah, that's good. Oh,
I came prepared. It's up and it's good, and Harvard wins the Ivy League title. How about that?
He doesn't need that kind of PR, but that's good for him. It'll make him happy.
Good.
I have nothing from Kent State to hold up, so that's one of my alma maters. My other alma mater is why I wore green today. The University of Vermont winning the national championship in soccer. So
yes,
UVM national champions in soccer. So green for them, green for the Celtics.
Yeah,
and green with envy over this book that you put out. I just got to hold this book up. This must weigh 50 pounds. That's all I can say. This is the heaviest book other than the Bible.
It doubles as an exercise implement.
It does. It does.
You can do presses with it.
We're going to talk about this book and why it's an absolute must for Christmas. And I'm not getting a piece of the action on Christmas books, but I'm just telling you, I'm going to take this book. I'm going to give one to my son. I'm going to give one to my grandson. They're both Bruins fans. They're both hockey fans. And this will be something they'll cherish the rest of their lives. I'll just say that before we get into the book, Richard. And I'll introduce you. First of all, UnAnchored Sports brought to you by Cold Springs RV in Ware, New Hampshire. And don't ask me where. I'll tell you about it later. And, of course, George Gray's Lexington Toyota. And we'd be nothing without those guys. So we appreciate their support. Richard, the curator of the New England Sports Museum, you and I go back a long ways. I went to the building that was across the street from WBZ, that old little barn or whatever that it was, to the Dave Cowan's efforts to bring the sports museum into reality. And now it's ensconced at the TD Garden in the Remarkables. But why don't you just explain, before we get to that, I'm telling you, I'm going to hold this up many times for exercise purposes only. Before we get into this, I want to ask a little bit about the background of the Sports Museum and what people can expect when they go to see it.
Okay, well, let me do the Cliff Notes version here. I'm in year number 43 at the Sports Museum, by the way.
43, that's unbelievable. That's longer than I was at Channel 4.
Look, when you have a job in Boston sports, this is the Paris of sports. This is the greatest sports community on the planet. So
not going to be disagreed, that's for sure.
Yeah, so here we are. Anyway, and you have been our great friend, and I admire you so much, for many reasons. And of course, I have to also add, I've been driving a George Gray Toyota for the past 10 years, and nothing like it. It gets me to and fro. It's the best.
There you go. I don't have to do this commercial now.
You don't have to do the commercial. So anyway, the Sports Museum started way back in 1977, was incorporated as a not-for-profit, but it took a few years to get it off the ground. As great a museum community as we are in Boston, starting a museum is a tough proposition because it's hard to find real estate. There's a lot of competition for museum visitation, but we also happen to be in an unparalleled sports community and environment. So, this was a challenge worth undertaking. So I give credit to Matthew Scan and to Vic Caleri for starting the museum. I give tremendous credit to my sort of de facto big brother, Dave Cowens, who I worked side by side with for 12 years. And he's like a member of my family. What a devoted, dedicated, incredible community champion, as well as, being a champion athlete. And we finally got it open in 1987. So 5 years after I began work at the museum, we finally opened our doors on Soldiers Field Road. We tried to get the Custom House Tower in Boston. We had the approval for it, but it just didn't work. But then Steve Karp of New England Development and Cambridge Side Galleria invited us over to his development. We were
remember
there.
that I remember the opening.
Yeah, we were there for about 7 years, and Steve was great, and he remains a great friend. And but eventually, the rent caught up with us, as it can do at times. Rent or college tuitions here, and we then had the fortuitous occasion of talking to Rich Creswick, then at the Fleet Center, as it was called. And Rich remains a trustee of the Sports Museum, is our great friend. And there was a need at, the building we now know as the Garden. And I think a lot of us forever just called it the Garden, where when the new building opened, and after 29 years, to me, it's still the new place. There were no displays connecting it to the context of the great sports heritage of the region. It was, it could have been it could have been the lobby of a Holiday Inn in Omaha or something. There wasn't anything connecting it to this great sports town. And we had a need. They had a need. They have been great friends and supporters of us over the years. And so we opened our museum there in 1999, about 2 years after we had pulled out of the Cambridge Side Gallery, and we've been there for 25 years.
Amazing.
And I also give a big tip of the hat to Jim Davis and Joe Preston at New Balance. New Balance is our presenting sponsor. They have been tremendous. They're a Boston born and bred company. And of course, you look at what they've done in their development in Brighton with the practice rink of the Bruins, with the Red Auerbach Center, with the new track, their corporate headquarters. Jim is one of the great citizens of Boston, and he has sought fit to, be our sponsor and be one of our great supporters. So we're blessed. Again, as my friend Dave Cowens used to say, we're one of those, 45-year overnight success stories. You basically, if you're going to succeed in Boston in sports, you get your uniform dirty, and we've gotten our uniform dirty. Believe me.
No, you guys have grinded it out, if that's the proper word.
Yep.
Over the years, you just kept your nose to the wheel and have had a vision and have developed that vision. No matter how hard it was or what it took to do it, and funds are always a problem and always an issue and always something that needed to be done. You have to take me over to the new TD Garden and what's available. Yes. The last thing I remember, the last time I was there, you had many things on the wall, many things that were able to, be seen by so many people. The statues are there of Orr inside and Bird inside both. You have to tell me what's there now. So.
Oh yeah. Well, again, one thing that I would add too is over the past year, we've just concluded this celebration of the Bruins centennial. The Bruins asked us.
Yes, I know. I have it in my hand. Okay.
Yeah. Oh well. They also asked us to help create a special display area, which is now an adjunct of the museum, called the Bruins Heritage Hall. So we have a state-of-the-art museum connected to the Sports Museum, solely devoted to the heritage of the Boston Bruins. And I think of any NHL team, the Bruins have the greatest and most loyal support. Bruins fans are unlike the fans of any other team.
This is great that you brought this up, Dick, because it's a topic we talk about frequently. And
they are unreal. You see half the people why? There.
No, I know that they're 100 years old. They were the first American team in the National Hockey League. There's so many things about the Bruins, but it goes down to the central question of why you were able to make that statement and why it rings so true. The statement being the Bruins fans are unlike any other fans, not only in this town, but in any town, in any sport in America.
Yes, and I will state my case like a lawyer making a close in a courtroom. The Bruins, as the first American NHL team, okay, within 5 years of their starting, the National Hockey League had 10 teams. 6 of them were American teams. So Boston led the way. All right. They also, their owner, founding owner, Charles F. Adams, bought an entire hockey league. He bought the Western Hockey League mainly to secure the services of one player, Eddie Shore. Eddie Shore was both the Babe Ruth and the Ty Cobb of hockey at the time. Now, what Adams did was he sold a number of the other players from that league to other teams, but Eddie Shore was the prize. And the growth of the Bruins, the growth of the National Hockey League in America, you can point right to when Eddie Shore came to Boston to when the league exploded. There's a reason that the Garden was built in November of 1928, that it opened in November of 1928 to an overflow crowd. Well, that capacity of 13,909 remained, every seat remained full for decades. And the Bruins, inspired the building of arenas in Chicago, Toronto, Detroit. They are,
These are the
there
kinds
we
of things.
go.
I mean, I can just start out. It's very awkward to hold this up.
Yes.
I'm just going to say that these are the kinds of things that are in this book, starting with the first arena, and then Eddie Shore, Cooney Weiland. You keep going, but no, don't let me interrupt your story.
So you have the team becoming a juggernaut in terms of both a competitive, competing team. They win a Stanley Cup in the first year they opened the Garden in 28-29. In 29-30, they have the best one-loss record from a percentage standpoint in NHL history. Now, they set the points record 2 years ago, but their .875 win percentage in 1929-30 is still the record for the league. And and at the time they were, really establishing the league as a force in American sports here in the U.S. They had a minor league team called the Tiger Cubs playing at the Garden at the same time, sort of like back in the 70s when we had the Braves and the Whalers playing at the same time as the Bruins. Hockey has always been an incredibly important sport here. Why? Because the first intercollegiate game was played at Brown in the 1890s. We had club teams playing at Boston Arena before the start of the Bruins. I mean, Matthews Arena, formerly known as Boston Arena, oldest indoor ice arena in the world, dating back to 1910. Hobie Baker skated there. Eddie Shore, Howie Morenz. I mean, it's a building that is still being used. Unfortunately, it has structural issues now and is probably not long for this world. But the fact is that if you were to do a hypothetical X-ray of Boston sports, if Boston sports were a person, I know this sounds a little weird, but if you did an X-ray, the heart would be a hockey puck. We're all 1 or 2 degrees separated from knowing somebody that played Division I hockey, minor league hockey, or National Hockey League. I know many people, obviously, the Sports Museum, who played in the National Hockey League, but we are the closest thing to a Canadian city that exists in the United States. Maybe Detroit, who calls themselves Hockey Town. Well, they're a mile from Canada, so okay, we're a 3.5 hour drive from the border, but we're still one of the great hockey cities in the world. I would say the 2 great hockey cities on the continent are Montreal in Canada and Boston here.
I don't know anybody that would disagree with that unless they came from one of the original 6
right
towns. Everybody's got their own flag to fly, but it's not just the game, Richard. It's the people that are in it. I mean, I guess I'm talking about Bruins and all their characters and character quaintness, if you will, and bizarre behavior, if you will. in a playful way. But they're any sportscaster, sports writer will tell you that the easiest access of all the athletes are hockey players.
Well,
They
okay,
are
that's
so easy to
yeah.
deal with and much more down to earth and so less full of themselves than so many other athletes.
Well, I think it's attributable to a few things. The first is for many years, and this is still true, not as true as it was, most of these guys are Canadian. Canadians are nice people. I mean, you go to Canada and it's like going to the Midwest here. People are accommodating, courteous. Okay, so you start with that.
Yeah.
Then you also have the fact that there are no prima donnas in a hockey locker room. None. Why? It's a brotherhood of suffering. Everybody gets stitches. Everyone gets hurt. Everyone plays hurt. So you don't have the pecking order that exists in sports here, especially in sports that are big intercollegiate sports where kids are, basically put on a pedestal from the time they're playing AAU basketball or they're quarterbacking their Pop Warner team, and are being recruited. Well, in hockey, you're on a junior A team, and everyone's treated the same. So, and I think another factor is the fact that, and this is not as true now as it was, but back in the day, these players were paid fairly paltry salaries. So, back in the old 6-team league, every single player worked an off-season job to make ends meet, to pay their bills. So they were as much like the fans, more like the fans than any other sports constituency. So
interesting.
And then some of the characters, I mean, okay, so a great story. I love this story. So this, I think it was in 1964. Bruins forward Orland Kurtenbach was quoted in an article in the paper saying, this was in maybe the end of October, that, well, he really didn't start scoring until the Christmas holidays, that, he didn't round into scoring form until that. Okay. The next home game, members of the Gallery Gods came wearing Christmas hats and they sung Jingle Bells to him from this old second balcony. Those are Bruins fans. That's the, I mean, who else had a group called the Gallery Gods? I mean, and the origin of that group was that back in the 30s, second balcony seats were not reserved. So a group of them went to Art Ross, the GM of the team, and said, look, we're all working guys. Some of us are unemployed. This is during the Depression. Can we at least reserve our seats since we're your most loyal supporters, and we'll pay you in installments? And Art Ross said, yeah. So there was a loyalty to the fans that started right off the bat from ownership. And that group remained intact for years. I'm actually a member of the Gallery Gods. I'm very proud of that fact. I don't belong to that many clubs. I subscribe to the Groucho thing about I wouldn't want to join a club that would have me, but the Gallery Gods are one that I am damn proud to be a part of. And Bruins fans still are, what's your profile of a Bruins fan? Well, it's a plumber from Quincy who's spending the mortgage money on playoff tickets, and he'll find a way to pay the bills otherwise, but he is not going to miss the Bruins. He's not going to miss a Bruins game. I mean, every team in Boston has its own sort of profile of what their constituents are. And the Bruins fans are the most blue collar. I've talked to the waiters and the waitresses at the Garden. Okay, so who tips the best? Who spends the most? Bruins fans by a mile. They're the people you want to be in a foxhole with.
Yeah, that's true. And I saw it just yesterday, a repairman on my automobile. We were just talking about sports in general, and he asked me, "Did you go to the 100th celebration?" I mean, it came out of nowhere. The question, that's the least expected question I got from him, and it was, it just was over and over again. This happens. I've seen it all summer. We talk about the great success of the Celtics, and while they applaud the great success of the Celtics, they say, "Well, I wish it could have been the Bruins." I would rather. I'm just saying. Not it was anti-Celtics. It's just pro Bruins. I guess it's both ways. Now let me ask. Go ahead. I'm going to get into this, and I want to talk about Harry Sinden and this latest iteration of what we remember. I mean, you remember because you're a historian and have
Yep.
written about this and know this fact by fact. But the recent iteration of the Bruins for a lot of us started with Orr and Sinden and that whole group back then. And I think you know what I'm talking about. First of all, how did Orr become a Bruin?
It's a great story. So Weston Adams Sr., Milt Schmidt, and Ren Blair, who was a scout for the team at the time, were on a trip to Ontario to scout a couple of players. Oh gosh, I'm trying to think of the names of them now, but they have receded into history. They got to the rink early. So they got to the rink on their scouting trip about half an hour before the game that they were scheduled to see began. They saw the end of a game where this little kid, this little defenseman who was playing against competition 3 and 4 years older than he. So it was a 12-year-old Bobby Orr playing in I forget whether it was a squirt game. I think it was a squirt game. It was like someone wandering into the Cavern Club when the Beatles were, playing when, it was, what was it like? It was like, I don't know, watching Julius Erving in a junior high school game. I mean, but or even it's even more significant than that because it was as though the skies opened and the finger of God, Michelangelo came down with a hockey puck and handed it to them saying, "Gentlemen, this is the future of the game." And it was like seeing Bruce Springsteen at the Pink Pony. Here he was, and they had to basically, they had to convince the family over a period of 2 years to have them sign an agreement. It was called a B form. I'm not going to get too technical here, but a B form committed a junior player to a junior team affiliated with an NHL team. So effectively at age 14, Bobby Orr would be signing with the Boston Bruins. And for that privilege, they agreed to buy Bobby's father a secondhand car and to stucco their house on Great North Road in Parry Sound, Ontario. Okay. Among the weird stories in Boston sports, Bob Cousy's name being pulled out of a hat. This is right up there with them. Okay. So they get the services of Bobby Orr, still the greatest performer, not just in sports, in anything that I've ever seen. And I saw Jimi Hendrix at the Framingham Music Tent when I was 12 years old. Okay, so he's the only person I sort of compare Bobby Orr to. And that's not to denigrate anyone else. We all know a defenseman who led the league in scoring twice, and he did it playing hurt. You never hear him say, well, I would have been better. It's hard to imagine Bobby Orr having been better. Okay, it's like, wait a minute. All right. Really? No. You sort of had to be there. And I love talking about him to people that didn't see him play because I'll urge them to go to YouTube to look up his highlights. But there was nothing like seeing him at the Montreal Forum. My brother went to college at McGill, so we would go to games, standing room up at the Forum. Okay. All right. We knew the applause here. All right. Where it just would go on and on. The greatest degree of respect that Bobby Orr ever got in my book was in games at the Forum, where when he would begin a rush behind his net, it's like he turned the sound down in the crowd. It's like he literally turned the dial down, and it almost went to a whisper. Why? They were anticipating greatness. They knew that at any point they're going to see something they'd never seen before. And most of the time he delivered on that. And I told that to him one time, and he sort of, he wouldn't know he was playing the game. So, when you're playing a game, you're entirely focused on that. Right. But as a Bostonian up there, I'm up there going, wow.
Yeah, I get chills hearing that story.
It just gets chills. I mean, so
I get chills hearing it, and I can imagine it. You can put yourself there and imagine it. And once I heard Danny Gallivan call a Montreal Canadiens game, which he thought he was one of the best.
One of the best. Spinorama.
Amazing. But, the whole thing, it went together. It fit together like a puzzle. And what you say brings up chills, which brings us to Harry Sinden and his contributions, and Don Cherry, and the whole act that went on between Esposito and Cashman and Busick and blah, blah, on and on and on. Cheevers.
Yep.
I mean, they're all documented in the book. So maybe I don't know what you want to talk about with the book, but I really want to get into this. And we might as well just start. And if I have to interrupt you for a camper, a camping commercial, I'll do that.
And I love to camp, and I spent summers camping in Temagami, Ontario, where
well, then you know what I'm going to talk about.
We talk about hockey all summer long, believe me, and people were jealous of me because I was from Greater Boston, believe me. But I'll start in discussing.
By the way, it's the heaviest thing I've left. It's the heaviest thing I've held in a long time. That's how heavy this book is.
Well, there you go. I appreciate the plug and the good words, Bob. It means a lot coming from you.
God,
it really
you
does.
See this thing. This is a work. It's not a book. It's a work of art.
Well, and you know what?
I don't care what it costs or anything. If you're a hockey fan, this has got to be on your coffee table or wherever you keep it, because this is an unbelievable conversation starter or ender. Because if you're in a conversation and you start looking at the book, you're not going to talk to anybody until you're done looking at the book.
No, and I've got to give credit to my partner in this. Give credit to Rusty Sullivan
right.
for having done a superb job. We had a fun time doing this. Again, we're right in the building. I can tell you that much of the motivation, my own personal motivation behind putting everything into this, was the fact that I knew a lot of these players. So I knew George Owen, who was on the 1929 Stanley Cup championship team. Milt Schmidt and Woody Dumart were good friends. They were like uncles to me. They were just dear, wonderful, kind people. And so a lot of what went into this is making sure. I've actually come to the conclusion that a lot of what my job is as curator of the Sports Museum is simply making sure that people that shouldn't be forgotten aren't forgotten. Okay. And the Bruins are dear to my heart. They're dear to all our heart. Yeah, no, you're holding up that page. Bobby Orr signing his first contract. I mean, he's a kid. He was 18 years old.
And the rise of the big bad Bruins. That's the
rise of the big bad Bruins, and they are still as great as our 6 Super Bowl championships, as great as the Red Sox have been in the past 20 years. That Bruins team, I still would gather, especially with those of us in a certain age category, there was no more charismatic group. I mean, they owned the city and the state of Massachusetts and New England, lock, stock, and barrel. And if any of them had to buy a meal or drink,
other team would go up in the stands in Madison Square Garden and defend each other. I'm just, go ahead.
And of course, being led by a local guy, Mike Milbury.
Yeah, the whole story was he was still in the locker room at the time this fight started.
He came right out and went right in there.
Local guy from Walpole.
He hears about the shoe incident, about hitting the guy with his shoe every day of his life, and he never gets tired of it.
No.
And it was right around Christmas time too. It was December 23rd.
It was Christmas Eve. I'll never forget it.
Right.
Because I had just started on the set on the weekends doing sports, and that was one of the first shows that I ended up doing, and was blessed with those highlights. That highlight did more for my career than it did for anybody else's. I'm telling you.
No, I mean, this is the essence of the Bruins, isn't it?
Yeah, I just always, whatever it is, whether it's Terry O'Reilly, but doing, the first one over the boards in Madison Square Garden, but he was so much more. People think he was only a fighter and spent all that time in the penalty box. And where did he end up in the 100th celebration? In the penalty box. But he was a goal scorer too. I mean, he was a contributor all the way around. So, okay, shut up, Bob, and let Dick do the talking here.
Well, I mean, okay, so you start with the Orr era. You start with Milt Schmidt, the ultimate Bruin, two-time Stanley Cup champion as a player. As a coach, he led two teams in the 50s to the finals, teams that had no business being there. He led them. Okay. As an executive, he made the trade for, Stanfield, Hodge, and Esposito. That might be the greatest trade, not just in hockey, but maybe even in sports history. Okay. And hired Harry Sinden to be head coach. Harry, who as an amateur player had been a world champion, if the league had been 12 teams back then, he'd have played in it. Because when he was our minor league coach in Oklahoma City, he was a teammate. He was player coach. He was a teammate of half the guys on that 70 Stanley Cup team. So in the brief 10-year career of Robert Gordon Orr, okay, the league triples in size. The NHL gets its first national television contract with CBS. Players' salaries rise exponentially, and hockey rinks spring up like dandelions on your lawn in May.
It's true. It was such an effect.
Amazing.
People forget how that boom blossomed at that particular time. The building of the rinks for everybody.
I guarantee you every single player on that 1980 U.S. Olympic team, the Miracle on Ice, drew inspiration from Bobby and his teammates. Why? Because the Bruins were the national television game on CBS, with the great voice of Dan Kelly doing the broadcast. That was, they were America's team back then. They, the Cowboys call themselves that. Well, on skates, it was the Bruins because everyone watched these guys and drew inspiration from it. And then the last thing I would add is that team really prompted the creation of a rival league, the WHA. So at one point, in the mid 70s, we had three pro hockey teams playing at the Garden. The Bruins, of course, where you couldn't get a ticket. The Whalers, who were really good, they won a championship. And the Braves, which included players like Terry O'Reilly working their way up onto the Bruins. So there was pro hockey being played in Boston for, I think, 3 years during the winter, 3 or 4 times a week. You could go to a pro hockey game 3 or 4 times a week. Has there ever been a city in this country that has had the proliferation of professional hockey? Then you add to that the great college competitions here, with all of the Beanpot schools and championships being won at BU as they did.
Look at the people, look at the personalities. Jackie Parker, Billy Cleary, not Jerry York, but come on.
Oh, Snooks Kelly.
Snooks Kelly and all.
Fernie Flaman,
absolutely. Northeast, come on. These were led by Parker and Kelly. I got to say that they were princes among men. They were just unbelievably great guys.
Yeah, and then early on we had Cooney Weiland, who'd been a star with the Bruins on 2 Stanley Cup teams. I mean, Greater Boston and New England is to hockey what Texas and Florida are to football. I mean, it is the life, it is the sporting lifeblood here. Okay. And
I just get excited talking about even the 80s team at Lake Placid. I mean, think about when that hit. You're right. It was like a booster shot on top of Gatorade. It was okay. I got to shut up about this because I get too excited talking about it because it brings out such individual passion. Hey, I'm a kid that grew up in Ohio, and double runners seem to be the dress of the day. So
and we express our condolences for the recent death of the great Rocky Colavito. What a player!
Of course. Oh my God! I lived in Ohio, and I spent a lot of time in Municipal Stadium in Cleveland. So I know about Francona, and I know about his father, and I've seen Tito, the real Tito, play.
Yep.
And Rocky Colavito, of course, and the Harvey Keene. Okay, don't get me started down that
No, you get started there, but you know what's great? Okay, so that for 7 of the past 8 years, we had a Hollywood story play itself out every day of the hockey season at the Garden. What was that Hollywood story? Matt Grzelcyk, defenseman for the Bruins, and his father John, a 56-year member of the Bull Gang. I mean, it doesn't get more Hollywood or Hallmark movie of the week than that. I mean, and I would always stop him and just say, John, I've said this 100, 200 times. It is the one in a million story. It is just so touching and fabulous. And, you know, now, of course, Matt's playing with the Penguins, but he's still in the league. And when he came back for his first game in Boston as a Penguin, the cheers just were there. It was an ocean of cheers. And John, of course, was there. Well, he'd spent the day working on the Bull Gang. Okay, where else does this happen?
No, and you know what? Bruin fans have a way of knowing this. They just tap into everybody's genealogy. They just seem to understand this and know it. It's in their DNA. For some reason, it's passed down in their DNA. I got to talk about camping for just a second.
Yes.
Let's just take a quick time out.
Yep.
Take a breath, and we'll go back to the book and some more of these fascinating things that Dick Johnson brings us. He's the curator of the New England Sports Museum. But you do camping, right, Dick? You've done.
I did canoe camping for 4 straight years in the wilds of Canada. I love camping.
Well, you know what? The great thing about camping, I always thought, is that it provides freedom. It allows you to be free and to do what you want to do when you want to do it. Like this couple that I know, and I've talked about them before, Phil and Jackie, each had separate campers. They happened to camp in Raymond, New Hampshire, next to each other. And as things turned out, the relationship blossomed. And, you know, things so far, it's been happily ever after. They've moved into one camper, and they have another one just in case. But the in case goes that somebody could leave at midnight and you wouldn't know. That gives you the kind of freedom that you need in a relation. Probably makes the relationship work.
Well, as they say, with every story, there's always a hitch.
That's it. I got it. You know,
okay.
That's
right.
really good. That's really good. I have to remember that. You don't mind if I use that, right?
No, absolutely not.
There's always a hitch. And first of all, if you want to see what's new in 2025, and these campers are amazing. Every year they just seem to get better and better and better. And anyway, Cold Springs RV has next year's models, and they're arriving daily. The latest in pop-ups, travel. What kind of camper did you have, Dick?
I was doing canoe tripping, so it basically had a tent and canoes. It was in the middle of the wilderness.
Really? No.
Yep.
I can remember doing Outward Bound, and we had one day alone in the woods.
Yeah.
And that was not a lot of fun. That probably was the scariest I've ever been in my life.
Yeah, I was in the Canadian woods for 6 weeks. It was with a group of 12 of us, but still, yeah.
Anyway, Cold Springs RV has next year's models, and they're arriving daily. Latest in pop-ups, travel trailers, fifth wheelers, and motorhomes. Tell them Lobie and Lynchy sent you. And at Cold Springs RV, the doors are always open. You can freely browse. The latest in camping, Cold Springs RV. They're in Ware, New Hampshire. Now, a lot of people don't know where Ware is, but Ware is a place in New Hampshire. It's west of Goffstown, which is the only town I know that's named for a quarterback.
Yep.
Jared Goff, Goffstown, New Hampshire. West of there and north of Tingsboro in Massachusetts.
Well, there's a Ware in Massachusetts too.
Well, don't confuse us now, because
no. But this you want to cross the border
to Ware when they should be going to Ware.
Right. Yes. You want to go to New Hampshire.
You want to go to the Ware.
Yes.
The Ware we're talking about is Ware.
Who's on first?
You got it. That's it. ColdSpringsRV.com. And thank you very much for helping me out with that, Richard.
Yes.
Because we're all fans of camping because it provides that kind of freedom. Now, we were talking about, what were we talking about? The 80s, the Olympic team, which of
Yeah,
course
we were
was great.
talking just really about, the impact the Bruins have had and the loyalty and devotion of the fan base, which is
Okay, let me get back.
unparalleled.
Good. That reminds me. I got to get back to the book, and
Yep.
like I said, I'll repeat. I'm not getting a cent out of this pitch. I'm just
Yep.
doing you a favor by calling your attention to this book, because we're doing this podcast a week before Christmas, basically, and this is easy. This is about the easiest Christmas present you'll ever find. Okay, you're saying this is the last time? No, this is easy. My son, my grandson, this is what they're getting.
Yep.
So that's that. That's it.
Nice.
I don't watch the podcast, so I don't feel guilty about bringing this up, and they'll be surprised. But this is an easy one. Okay, go ahead, Richard. Talk about. This is from nuts to bolts. I mean, this is from the start of everything to present day, to the 100th celebration.
Yeah, I mean, certainly Montreal has more Stanley Cups, and they had the advantage every year of getting the best players from Quebec. Okay, well, okay, we know how that worked. But there is no hockey team or organization that had more of an impact on the growth of the game itself, the growth and development of the National Hockey League, than the Bruins. They are the most impactful team in hockey history for many reasons, and a lot of them are covered in the book. But again, as you said, they're a team of character with characters. I mean, we had guys like Leo Labine, who was the Brad Marchand of his day, Eddie Shack, the Clown Prince of Hockey. I mean, clear the track. Here comes Shack. And when I talked to Milt Schmidt about his acquisition of him, he said he traded for Shaq on the same day he got Hodge, Stanfield, and Esposito. And he thought Shaq had a lot to do with helping to sort of form the chemistry of those big bad Bruins squads. Why? Because Shaq was the only player who could skate with Bobby Orr in practice. Everyone else would be 2 or 3 strides behind him, but Shaq was a really good skater and an incredible character. And so watching the formation of those great teams was a delight. So, they make the playoffs again in 1968 after a hiatus of, I think, 8 years, which, that was a long haul. Of course, they still sold out every night, even during those 8 years. It was the same 8 years that the Celtics won NBA championships. Isn't that a weird parallel?
Very
so
weird.
The Boston sports were those two. And then they finally got to the promised land in 1970. They came very close to winning the previous year in 1969, losing in the semis to Montreal on an overtime goal by Jean Beliveau. It was this close. And if players hadn't been hurt and if players hadn't jumped to the WHA, that group probably could have won another 2 or 3 Stanley Cups. We'll never know. But the fact they won 2, and the fact that in 1971, with the highest scoring team in NHL history to that point, they got upset by Ken Dryden and the Canadiens. I mean, that hurt a lot, but they bounced right back. But they were the most entertaining team, in my own experience, to watch in any sport, because the unpredictability of what Bobby Orr would do. I mean, seeing a defenseman as the best scorer in the game, I trying to think of what the parallel would be in another sport, and there really isn't one.
Well, it's like Shohei Ohtani, who can be the pitcher and hitter that he is.
Yeah, now I wonder whether he's ever going to pitch again. I certainly hope he does, but
who was the best
Ohtani
fighter?
Would certainly be a really good comparison. Yes.
Who was the best fighter or the toughest guy out of all those tough guys? Winsink, Jonathan, O'Reilly.
What's interesting? Again, I don't mean to beat a dead horse here, but what players say? It was Bobby. He fought his own battle. So, whenever I hear an argument presented to which I, shake my head, oh, Gretzky's the greatest player. Well, hold on a second. Gretzky had a bodyguard his entire career. Bobby fought his own battles. And the players I've spoken to have said, well, there are certainly players on the team whose role, part of their job description, was being a guy who would, drop their gloves. No one wanted to mess with Bobby Orr. He was a great fighter. So I sort of tip my hat towards him in every regard, because he could do everything. If he'd put the pads on, he'd have been a great goalie. He was that good.
Well, that kind of answers the question in a very surprising way. I would have thought, with O'Reilly or Jonathan Winsink or Nyland or these guys, but no. And then I think I would have always thought that, well, none of the opposition wanted to fight Orr because not because he was such a great fighter, as you say, but because he was that talented that they didn't want to touch they didn't want to touch the golden chalice, in other words.
I'm guessing someone has to have compiled this, but I bet if you went to YouTube, someone has compiled Bobby Orr fighting, and you watch him fight, and it's like, holy Toledo. He's a really tough guy, as nice. And we know Bobby. Bobby is one of the nicest people. He's Mr. Rogers nice. Okay. You put him in a competitive environment, like Dave Cowens is the same way. There's a Jekyll Hyde thing. These guys become absolute killers when they're competing. And Bobby was a killer as a competitor. And you talk to teammates, and of course, a look from Bobby Orr in the locker room between periods, if you weren't having a good game, if he just cast a glance at you, like, that was enough to set a Bunsen burner under your hindquarters to get moving. I mean, he was as intense a competitor as he was talented and gifted a player. And
well, so many people ask the question, I know this, Dick, how can they be so tough on the ice and so nice off of it? How did they turn? How are hockey players able to turn that switch to be, brutally tough, instant drop the gloves on the ice, punch until they're exhausted, and off the ice be the nicest guys you'd ever want to meet?
Well, you get it out of your system, I guess. You leave it at the
office.
office.
No, that's too easy an answer. I'm sorry.
That's too easy an answer, but I think it's also, again, I revert back to Canadian upbringing, and I could tell you some anecdotes about Canadians. I'm not going to bore you with them, but Canadians are extremely polite, nice people, and of course, they like to joke about that fact, and that's reflective in the constituency of the National Hockey League. Most of these guys are from Canada. Their upbringing has been that of yes, sir, no, sir, and that's reflected in what we see. And guys wearing National Hockey League sweaters. That's sort of who they are.
What do you want people to take away from this? It's more than a book. It's a lesson. It's a history lesson.
It's a history lesson that a team can meld itself into a community and become indispensable. And the Bruins have been indispensable for years. At the time that the Garden came down, or when it was being planned to come down, there was discussion of, does the team move to New Hampshire? Do they try to get the government to help them build a building? No. Bruins ownership stayed right on Causeway Street. When I give tours to people, I say that the new arena was built 18 inches away from the old Garden and another 18 inches away from a highway overpass right adjacent to it. It's remained in the heart of town. So figuratively and literally, the Boston Bruins are in the heart of Boston and always will remain so.
Well, with the Celtic sale, there's going to be changes, or there have to be, I think, changes. The Celtics may have to build a new arena to survive, if because they don't own their own building. That's a whole other political story that I don't really necessarily want to get into. I just wanted to find out your take on what you wanted these people to take away. And what about the Bruins? That always feeling the penurious aspects of Jeremy Jacobs, who wrote the foreword for this book, and his son Charlie wrote the afterword. And of course, Cam Neely has a very interesting couple pages on what it means to be a Boston Bruin. You know, we haven't talked about Neely at all because he was the quintessential hockey player in my opportunity report on this team. He was the quintessential hockey player.
He was the quintessential player. I was so happy when they won the Stanley Cup in 11 because as the team president, his name is going to be on that cup. And absolutely, Cam, the season that he scored 50 goals in 44 games, injured, he had already been hurt, that bastard Ulf Samuelsson, God, we hate him still, don't we? That he came back from that, and he had as remarkable a season as any of the Bobby Orr campaigns. That's saying a lot, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Cam did so as a presence. He's still a presence. I'm walking down the hallway at the Garden and I see Cam coming, and it's like I straighten up a little bit because like this is the guy. This is, you know, yeah. I can imagine going into the corner with him and praying that I'd come out in one piece. What a force as a player. What a great executive. I mean, the Bruins do a lot for the community. Their engagement with Special Olympics, with the Sports Museum, with any number of other charities, they're right front and center in terms of, you know, being there. And so my admiration for these guys it just goes on. And the Stanley Cup is the hardest trophy in North American pro sports to win. It really is. I mean,
and they do such crazy things with it after they win. They take it into the ocean. They drink beer out of it. You can't imagine what's done with that Stanley Cup. If that cup could only talk, it would be better than this book.
There would be some stories that would have to be, that we would have to put, that we would not tell, I'm sure, but it is, but there's nothing quite like it. And the fact that, the Bruins, only 5 years after they started, they won it. I mean, and when they started, the joke was they had one team playing and one team on the railroad heading out of town. They only had a month to put a team together. So they got the right to field a National Hockey League team in 1924 on November 1st. And then they had their first game on December 1st. And their first goaltender was a dentist. You can't make this stuff up. Their first goaltender, his off-season job was a dentist. He was perfectly placed because, of course, I'm sure he needed to work on some of the teeth of the boys on the team. No
masks, right? No masks,
no helmets, no masks. Right. You just grit your teeth and bear it. That's what hockey. I mean, hockey is a brotherhood of pain.
Brotherhood of pain. I just want to briefly talk about. You mentioned the WHA guys that left. Sanderson left, went to Philadelphia.
Johnny McKenzie, Jerry Cheevers was probably, Jerry was probably the one that hurt the most. He went to the Cleveland
Crusaders, right?
Yeah. But the money that was being offered them at one point, Derek was the highest paid professional athlete on earth.
That's right.
And and I'm sure that you've had him on the program before. He'll tell you the story about a lawyer named Charlie Mulcahy, who was the reason he left the Bruins. That
really?
he did not want to hear from him, and he was about to sign a contract for $80,000. And just as he's about to put pen to paper, Mulcahy sticks his head in the door at the Garden and says to Sanderson, "You're not worth it." The pen went back into its holder, and we said goodbye to Turk, and history changed. I mean, there are, again, as you talk about these things, it's about people, and the people that have made the Bruins over the years, the Espositos, the Orrs, the Sandersons, the Westfalls, the Cheevers, O'Reillys, the Neelys, Patrice, I mean, Chara, we've been blessed because
how about Norman Levier? How about that? Oh my story?
God! He came to visit the museum, the Bruins Heritage Hall, about a month ago. Okay, And unfortunately, I was not there, but my associate curator, Brian, was there. And Norman showed his Bruins tattoo to him. So he has a tattoo on his arm of the Bruins spoked B. He is forever a Bruin. And when he skated at the final game at the Garden in
Oh my God.
1995, I was there. Everybody was just crying openly. It was the most touching thing. And of course, you know, who's behind a lot of the emotion? Ray Bork was there helping his friend and former teammate. And then, of course, when he gave up his number 7 jersey to Espo on the retirement night, that was another moment that only the Bruins could do that. Only a Bruin would have that feeling of connectedness and the sense of history and the occasion to make it something really special. So in many ways, those events even go beyond Stanley Cups and trophies. They tie it right
I'll
to
tell
my
you who
heart.
else they go beyond is like a guy like Nate Greenberg, who was, you know, seriously. Okay, first of all, your next book is going to be called "If Stanley Cups Could Talk." That's going
Yep.
to be your next book. I'd be first in
The
line for. I'd be
the
first in line for
unexpurgated
that one.
version.
I need. You mentioned at the beginning of the program you had a George Gray Toyota and has had one for quite a while. Maybe it's time to turn it in because if you went over to talk to George, he'd be thrilled to help you out, as you know.
I know that. No, the Toyota that I had prior to this one, I drove for 20 years, a Corolla, and I have a Matrix, which they don't even make anymore. And George set me up with a great one. It was used, of course, because I am a museum curator. I'm not an executive or anything. And that car has been a workhorse for 10 years. I love it. Thank you, George.
There you are. George Gray's Lexington Toyota. They've got the everything you're thinking about when it comes to vehicles. Go where we go where Dick Johnson goes, where Lynchy goes, where I go. I don't know. I must have bought 4 or 5 of them over the years, from Priuses to I don't know what, the 4-wheelers. I brought one over to Barnacle's show one day in the morning, and they laughed at it because it was a red one or something. I had to take it back and get another color, for crying out loud, just because that Barnacle's radio show was probably still the best radio show I've ever heard.
Yeah,
ever been part of. I mean, George Gray will treat you right. They're a family-owned and operated dealership, and the best thing about George is, you'll agree, Dick, is the service too. Just bring it in, and it's like clockwork. You need
absolutely.
They'll take care of it.
But I disagree with you. The best show on radio was you and Upton Bell. That was absolutely
okay. I'll give in. All right, you're probably
the best.
All right, okay, you got me on that one.
Yeah.
It was great having you, and I really
thank you.
Thank you. You're fantastic.
Thank you very much, Bob.
You brought a lot of thrills and chills to me just talking about this stuff, and blood, sweat, and 100 years. Believe me, you will not be disappointed, and you'll thank me and Dick Johnson and Rusty Sullivan for bringing it to your attention. Merry Christmas, Dick. Thank you.
Happy holidays. Merry Christmas.
Thanks you all very much for being with us. And Unanchored Sports, UnAnchored Boston can be found on all kinds of links, and you'll be happy you found it.
Thank you.